how hard it is to find genuinely exciting products in the world of data storage? Trust me, I know. I run a YouTube channel about it, but it has to be said that the cool guys in the world of private servers are kind of ice whale in most regards. These are a team that have been working on the Zima range of solutions. We've talked about several of them in the past, the Zimaboard, the Zimablade, the ZimaCube, and this is their fourth product. This is the Zimaboard 2, their newest single board server, an affordable, very DIY friendly server solution for those that are looking at running IoT applications, running a small-scale Plex media server, wanting to run containers and small-scale virtualization, or just a simple backup appliance for very customized DIY deployment. Available to be purchased in just this single board form with no active calling, something we will have to talk about later on, but on top of that it can be purchased with a myriad of accessories from Icewhale themselves on their own Zima Space website. Now, this is arriving on crowdfunding, and normally this is the part of the video where I would say to you, one, do not treat Kickstarter or any crowdfunding website the same as you would traditional retail, and secondly, the product that I have here on the table is representative of a prototype and not a finished product that may well end up with end of the day backers. It almost certainly is, but keep in mind that I've been sent a product that you are being expected to purchase early days on crowdfunding before it goes to traditional retail. So, buyer caution beware. But all of that said, this is a brand that have already had technically four successful crowdfunding campaigns for different versions of their own solutions, and they have delivered on every single one. And every single one of those solutions eventually went to traditional retail. So although I do stand by all of those disclaimers just now, I will highlight that these are a brand with pedigree and history in crowdfunding and delivering on those promises. But that's enough about the brand. Let's talk about the product. Well, you get the device here. It arrives with an operating system on board, ZimaOS, which is built on CasaOS. And again, this is an operating system that, although in its early days was focused very specifically on lean, efficient software deployment, I will say has become a little bit more feature-rich in recent years. Again, large in part thanks to that ZimaCube device we talked about before. But that said, you can of course install your own third-party operating system on this if you choose. Now, Unraid, easy. Slam in a USB, you're good to go. But what about things like TrueNAS? Well, the CPU inside that N150 CPU, we'll talk about more later on, that Twin Lake processor, it can run TrueNAS Scale on there, the Linux version of that, and all of the options and advantages that the ZFS platform brings you within TrueNAS Scale. But I will say, in terms of storage, keep in mind that although this arrives with 32 gig of internal storage, that internal storage drive is not delivered via an M.2 NVMe. It's not delivered via even a small-scale 2230. It is soldered onto the board, a little bit of flash storage there. So keep in mind that if you do overwrite that drive, you are going to be overwriting that ZimaOS that it arrives with there inside. So although you can almost certainly put TrueNAS on this, you're going to be overwriting that drive inside. Also, I would highlight that drive inside. It ain't no M.2 NVMe at the gigabyte level. This is a storage drive in there that when we were doing write operations to it only hit around 35 megabytes per second. Obviously, it was mixed drive writes, but keep in mind that is not the fastest storage drive in the market inside there. And something like TrueNAS, which you want for OS drive, is better suited for a faster drive. But when it comes to something like Unraid, you can run that off the USB into the memory anyway. Just before I continue talking about the hardware as well, I do want to highlight, again, I rarely do this anymore, but I really like the packaging this arrived with. I'm sure other reviewers are going to talk about this, but it's probably the most eco-friendly packaging I've ever received for a product. It arrived in the external box that it was in, which was cardboard and had recyclable foam, recyclable paper, I should say. But the actual retail box is this. You take this band off, you can use that to bind stuff in, and the unit was inside. But it also arrives with this nice little cardboard array that until you get a decent little case in place, you can actually sit both storage media and 2.5-inch drives and the board on its side inside this cardboard. I will highlight that's going to be largely necessary because of the temperatures that we're going to talk about later on, but still, it's a quirky little design factor in the presentation, and I just wanted to highlight it. And as mentioned, there is a kit of accessories that you can get for this. There's a drive cage you can get. Also, you can get hold of this, which is our SATA adapter here. And this has got two traditional SATA inputs that go into combined SATA and power connections there for drives. And there's also a little power pin there that feeds directly into the device. Again, this is a single board server where, again, you're not going to need to open it up. Don't worry, I do later on. But on the rear of the device, we've got our two SATA and we've got our power input there. And on the other side, we've got our traditional connections there. We've got 2 times 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there. We've also got USB 3.2 connections. We have a mini HDMI out. Again, you are going to need it in standard HDMI, so you're going to need a converter. And we've got that power input there for the included power adapter that this arrives with. Now, there is also probably the most interesting thing, we talked about this on previous gen single board servers from Icewell, it's got that PCIe slot there. Now that PCIe is a Gen 3 times 4 slot. That's pretty nice. The previous gen was a Gen 2 times 4 slot there, but Gen 3 times 4, that's not bad. That is 4 gigabytes per second, or 40 gigabit potential bandwidth there between the board and your card. So for that, we're talking 10 gigabit Ethernet cards. For that, we're talking graphics cards. For that, we're talking combo cards, which allows M.2 NVMe slots and 10 GBE. Indeed, this Synology card here, which has got 2 M.2 NVMe slots and has a 10 gigabit Ethernet port and a Gen 3 times 8 connector there, so keep in mind it would have been throttled down to times 4. I had that installed inside this device, and both the M.2 slots and the 10 GBE connection were visible within the operating system this arrived with. The slot even has a pre-cut out there, which means that even if you go for a longer card than standard times 4, you're still going to be able to fit that card in there. Next up, I want to talk about the design and the hardware inside this. Now, the design, as you've probably already worked out, this whole thing is a heatsink. The whole thing, all the way around, is metal top and bottom. Indeed, that top panel is pretty thick when I removed it, and the way it directly connects onto the CPU inside. Also, it's ridged to allow for that larger aerial coverage there, to allow a larger space for the heat to be dissipated when in operation. And indeed, most of the core components are based there on the top under that main panel. The CPU inside is the Intel Twin Lake N150. That's a pretty recently released processor following up after the Alder Lake. It's a quad-core CPU that can be burst up to, I believe, 3.6 gigahertz when needed. It also has a little over a gigahertz integrated graphics on burst when needed. 4-core, 4-thread. Now, compare that to its predecessor, which was a quad-core CPU, but it was the N3450 Celeron processor with a lower clock speed, lower integrated graphics there, but still maintaining the same TDP as its predecessor with a reported 6 watts TDP on that CPU. Obviously, things are going to scale out as you connect them. More on that later on. And there is the included 32 gig storage module inside, but it also arrives with 8 gig of DDR5 memory. But you can't upgrade that memory. And for the DIYs that are considering this, I do think 8 gig may have been a drop ball by the brand here. I think, although the predecessor was 8 gig as well, I think once you're reaching this CPU level and the kind of deployments we're talking about, I'd have, increased the price $15, $20 and got that to 16 gig. I know that CPU can support more than 8 gig, and if you can't upgrade it, because remember, it is soldered directly to the board, it isn't a SODIMM slot inside, that 8 gig may sound great on day one, but once you're looking at containerization, you are looking at virtualization, you are looking at some of those bespoke deployments, 8 gig may seem a bit of a low glass ceiling. But how does that shake out in terms of power consumption and heat generation? I'll say right now, in terms of performance, it comfortably saturated those 2 times 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there on the rear. And when I did have this device installed with this M.2 NVMe and 10 GBE card, I was able to easily saturate a 10G connection coming out the rear. But more importantly, when I was testing the performance of the M.2 NVMe's inside, I will say the performance wasn't that reliable, mainly down to the card, I will say, than this. So for example, via SSH, when I was doing testing via a terminal connection, I was able to hit, I believe, 1.3 to 1.6 gigabytes per second write on one of the M.2 NVMEs, read on those M2 NVMEs, but when I got to the write performance, it was around about 500, 600, 700 megabytes per second. But a lot of that was because of the nature of this card sharing that 10 gig and the M.2 NVMEs inside. It wasn't really any issue with this, because remember, this is at Gen 3 times 4, and that would have cut down and halved the performance of the M.2 NVMEs and the 10 gig inside there. Bottom line, again, full saturation of the ports that were there on board, and had I connected this with a standard 10 gig there, I'm pretty sure we would have done some semi-decent saturation. But keep in mind that we would have been connecting SATA SSDs perhaps on the rear here, so how we would have got to saturate a full 10G using just those would have been debatable. But when it comes to the heat and power consumption, first I want to talk about heat. This is fanless. Again, you are on 100% passive cooling here. The minute you deploy this in a closed case environment, you are going to need cooling. To put that into perspective, when I had this running on passive, so with that was when the system was sub 5% utilization, with drives connected but not doing anything, the temperature got to about 50 degrees after an hour. About an hour, it was sitting around the 50 degrees mark. After 24 hours with intermittent connectivity, it was at about 52 to 54 degrees consistently, as you can see from those HIC micro thermal imagings that you can see there on screen. So not terrible numbers, but I would say had this been in a closed environment with no active airflow, those numbers would have been substantially higher. But the power consumption results are definitely worthy of discussion, because when I had this in its passive form, so that is when I had the CPU idling for the most of the time. If it did activate, it was less than 5%. Memory utilization at sub 10%. 2 SATA SSDs in idle. One M.2 USB SSD connected in idle, and nothing on the PCIe slot. When I had it running in that setup, power utilization was around 10.4 to 10.6 watts. Keep in mind, that is a quad-core CPU that, yes, is largely in idle, but it's still got 3 SSDs connected via different mediums there. Now, what about active? At first, you would think active, because I'm going to, spoil the headline here, it was 39 to 40 watts power consumption. However, as hopefully the video online will show you, that was with a lot connected. I had that PCIe card that I talked about connected, so that was 2 M.2 slots populated with M.2s and running 10 gig network going into it active. I also had 2.5 gig active on there. I also had the 2 SATA SSDs active on there. I also had the USB drive active on there. The RAM was at 50% utilization. The CPU was pretty much exclusively at 100% with Plex running scraping and a playback, and 2 low-scale VMs running at a single core each and half a gig of RAM each. That was this device getting hit hard, and 39 watts to 40 watts power consumption in that setup for me was good when you take into consideration just how much I was hammering this. Now, I think we have to be realistic. I think a lot of users that are going to buy the Zimaboard 2 are not going to be that interested in this software. They're going to be buying the device so they can run Unraid or even TrueNAS, something that is actually possible because of that N15 CPU there. But I would say I would give it the time of day. Now, CasaOS, which was originally what this operating system launched as, is a free-to-access software developed from the guys at Icewhale. And I would say, due to a lot of the integrations and kind of upscaling that needed to be done for the Zima Cube, this software is actually pretty bloody robust now, and also pretty low impact. It needs to be, because a lot of these systems, such as the Zima Blade and the Zimaboard 1 and 2, need to be a lot more kind of refined about the software and hardware that is utilized. Now, unlike the first generation of this software, Now you've got quite fully featured add-ons. So, for example, we have got the base level storage that we talked about earlier on, but we've also now got the option to start creating RAID groups, something I talked about earlier on. But on top of that, managing individual drives, making them immediately accessible on a file folder level via a file browser here. Now that is extended, by the way, to utilizing that client application here that allows you to not only very quickly add storage drives via SMB in a single click, but also take advantage of that peer drop mechanic where you can kind of pair up devices, mobile and desktop, and quickly upload them to the system. Now the ZimaCube application, I will also add, as you can see here, allows for easy kind of merging between those individual connections. So for example, if you're utilizing the ZimaCube with Thunderbolt, utilizing this on a local area network, or taking advantage of some of the other network connections that may be afforded to you, or remote access credentials. Once you've added them and bonded the system via this application, it allows you to see which one you're utilizing, and if you have multiple, choose the one that's best suited to your needs. Likewise, real-time information available to the drives that you connect, either via those SATA ports, via a PCIe card, or via a USB drive, are all accessible here in the user interface. Regular updates, changing the wallpaper, language, time zone, all that sort of stuff to go for there. And again, most of it's fairly easy stuff that you can change on the fly, along with remote access setup as well. Very quick and easily. When it comes to adding more apps and services, it has an app store, but let's face it, it really is just a larger container arrangement there. You know, this isn't unusual. Hell, TrueNAS and Unraid do it as well. This is quite commonplace now to use Portainer and Docker related app centers for containerized apps for deployment. But I will say, one of the things this software does that, you know, something like CasaOS has been making a lot of noise about, but they do it on a much larger level, is a lot of the automated setup of these applications. So if we select one at random, so we're just going to scroll and stop, we're going to go for whatever the hell this is, and we're going to go ahead and click install. It's going to do it. We can run it in the background. And once that's installed, much like these applications here, let's have a look at Plex. No, even better, let's go for Jellyfin. You can go to the settings menu, and a lot of the containerization is automated thanks to the way a lot of those pre-created Dockers have been done. And it's been, you know, the extra directory creation, a lot of the PUID stuff, a lot of the, native setup of these apps is already done by default. So it's a nice middle ground for adding new apps and services to a third-party OS that I'm really glad that Icewhale have embraced here. But there are some proprietary features and services. We've talked about that peer drop feature there, that you can add and find devices on that local area network that utilize the Icewhale client tool to send data between them. But they've also now added a virtual machine tool here. And this has got one of those things that I love. And it's a virtual machine tool that allows you to download ready-to-go images. Now, this is good, but I will highlight, remember, you are running on that N150 CPU, and you are running on a system that doesn't have, much in the way of resources or much in the way of active cooling for that matter, and only 8 gig of non-upgradable memory. So clearly the virtual machine tool here is definitely better suited to the ZimaCube that this software is also designed towards. And it's nice that it's here, but, let's keep things a little bit realistic in which VMs we're going to be choosing to utilize on this kind of architecture. The File Explorer, again, gives you everything you're going to need. And again, as mentioned, you can access it very easily utilizing that ZimaCube client over SMB. The standard file processors are there. There isn't a huge amount of them, but you do have a decent number of options with regard to sorting out general access to this. Again, accessing the file manager via the storage interface. The options are all there. If you want to share, you want to copy, you want to paste, you can even create a very quick Samba or SMB share very easily and tailor some of the read and write or read only rules if you choose to, even dedicating that to singular users. And if you created that remote access link using the relay, you can do that, but you can't do it apparently on an empty folder. Let's go towards another folder. We'll go into that one that's got a lot of Plex data and go in there. And if we want, we can go ahead and share ourselves a file. And again, you can create that remote share link if you choose to, and then it creates it nice and easy, and you can manage those share links via that single interface. And if you're using cloud services, you can very easily and quickly add additional LAN storage over SMB from other NAS devices, or you can choose to go ahead and add your local cloud drive using authentication there. So you have the options. does have a lot going for it, and again, all the options you're going to need to manage your storage on the go are here, and using migration tools for backing up from local USB ports, and even other methodology from connected storage if you add more storage drives via those options, allows you to create a semi-automated backup system if you choose. As I say, they've spent a lot of time working on the fundamentals and then building upwards. A multimedia is, as you would expect, quite easy to play through. So for example, we can go in, have a look at the files, look at them live in the web browser, pretty much everything you expect. And although there isn't any right-click native options there, you've got a few there at the top for sharing and creating those links as described earlier on. And the same goes if, for example, you want to go ahead and start looking at, multimedia in other formats. So if you want to go for video media there, so if we go back into the main one, go into our test files area there and play ourselves a file, this will also be played in the web browser as you need. And again, there's some options there within this native video player, but I think most users looking at a system like this, let's be realistic, they're looking at something like Plex Media Server, which, as we've mentioned, you can go ahead and deploy very easily when files are playing in Plex. It's all fairly straightforward, and again, we're accessing this on the web browser, but it's hardly a test, and we've already done a video on Plex performance using the N150 CPU in a previous video anyway. But the reason I show it here is just to let you know that you can get things done on this, but just keep in mind, as you can see from the temperature increase there, that's not end of the world temperatures, but I will say that is not an exceptionally low temperature for when this system is doing precious little. Nonetheless, again, as long as you keep your expectations for file management and multimedia on this light, because that's what you expect from this, I think you're going to have a good time. I will also highlight that the software is very resource light, sure, but then it's also quite feature light as well. Most of the configuration I've kind of showed you. There's not much more to this. I'm not going to be as mean and call it a shallow operating system, but I'm going to say that they've focused on the fundamentals. They've focused on kind of what people have asked for, and this has been an operating system that has been slowly developing and kind of had its foundation work done for the last few years. But I'm not going to say it is feature rich. It's now the fundamentals, but if you want anything above and beyond that, that is where that application center is really going to be coming in for you there. I mean, little things. For example, if you want to monitor the resources, sure, you can see what processes are using the most resources right now. But if you try to dig more in, you have to use a far more, I would say, technically intimidating user interface here to find out more about it. And again, a lot of this, it is configurable, but I'm not going to say it's configurable in a tremendously user-friendly fashion here. It's not that easy to use, and it's nowhere near as graphical as the rest of the operating system does indicate there. Same thing with the widgets of what you can adjust, but really what you're seeing is pretty much everything. Monitoring network interfaces, if you want to add a PCIe card for more, is all doable there. But again, just keep things relative when looking at this software, and also don't lose sight of the fact that this software, of course, isn't the end of the road, and you can install third-party operating systems, and if anything, IceWow are heavily recommending that on this system. So think of ZimaOS, at least at this stage, as a robust freebie with this device, rather than your go-to operating system. I do think it is going to grow to something special, and I would argue, again, compare it against something like HexOS I've talked about before, this being included on this device, when something like HexOS for a lifetime license actually costs more than the cost of some of IceWow's devices, does give you some sense of value about this. But nonetheless, you're going to have to keep your expectations relative to a lean piece of software that's trying to run as lean as possible on lean hardware. Now, realistically, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of users aren't going to use that ZimaOS that this arrives with. They want to use their own custom third-party operating system on this. Again, the brand allows for that. And I will say, although I was very tempted to include a lot of USB Unraid deployed testing on this device, I resisted doing so simply because I would be bestowing the benefits of that third-party operating system software kind of on this, a product that intended for crowdfunding, which felt ick to me. So I will be doing a follow-up video on this device, but I'm going to wait until either the crowdfunding is finished or at least the crowdfunding has started. And in that video, I'm going to look at Unraid. And that video, I'm going to look at deployment and scenarios using third-party software, third-party hardware. This video has to be about this device on its own. And on that score, I'll say, much like its predecessor and much like the Zima Blade, I bloody love this. I like that this kind of solution exists. This straddles prosumer, enthusiast, and actual real-world use. I'm not in love with a lot of the choices. For example, the fact that the internal storage isn't delivered via M.2 NVMe bums me out. 8 gig of baseline storage memory and I can't upgrade it bums me out. The fact it's not normal HDMI out bums me out. And the fact there isn't active cooling, I'm not going to say bums me out, but I will say is going to be necessary. I don't think I can recommend this in any environment without some kind of active cooling, or at least a huge amount of potential airflow wherever you're going to utilize it. Bottom line, this is still a great product, and if this is the product that ends up being the result of that crowdfunding, I cannot recommend it enough. Now, again, it is crowdfunding. This isn't traditional retail, and as much as I like this product and I like the brand, I really, really do, I've got to say, because they're going crowdfunding, maybe use a credit card if you're going to use a purchase for this. Maybe use a methodology to make that purchase where your money isn't completely going to, be lost in the event that this doesn't get delivered upon. But they're a brand that already have 3 successful products, 3 well-managed campaigns, and 3 sets of successful distribution and delivery that then went on to eventual retail. So, although I've got to say all of that, I've got good feelings about this, and generally, I can definitely recommend this product in the state that it is in right now. But let me know what you guys think. Are you a previous buyer of one of the other Icewell products and you've had good or bad storage to share? Are you going to consider getting this? What do you want to see in that third-party testing video where we look at third-party hardware and software? Let me know in the comments below. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. Use the links in the description to get hold of on this or other Icewell products if you are interested and you found the video helpful, as it will allow us, me and Eddie, to keep doing what we do thanks to commission via those links. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.